Someone gave, someone donated, someone left a legacy. Generations of generous someones have helped shape Rhode Island into this amazing place we call home. How do you thank them? By leaving your own legacy. We can help.
Welcome to another edition of In Another Opinion, a public information program focused on the communities of color in the state of Rhode Island. I'm your host, Peter Wells. My guest today is Ann Tate, professor of art at Roger Williams University and a committed community activist that has brought those two passions to the West End and South Side of Rhode Island, of Providence. Welcome, Ann.
Hi. Nice to see
Thanks for coming on the show. We've talked a lot at Seven Stars Bakery, that's a plug, I suspect,
Yes.
about art in general and what's going on in the community. But you talked about some things I wasn't familiar with, and I thought it'd be nice to share with the viewers. One of the things you talked about, and that your website also talks a bit about it, is printmaking and painting in the visual arts. What does that really mean in lay language?
Well, painting and printmaking, I mean, painting is pretty well known, I think. It's the tradition of using paint as an
paint
expressive
brushes on
medium.
an easel?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So actually in my graduate studies, I did kind of studies of techniques of the Renaissance was one of my areas of interest, sort of technically. But it's really to teach the history of the medium and how it's used as an expressive means of expressing oneself. And some people would argue, I've heard it said, it leads the visual arts in many ways in the history of the arts. But today, of course, photography and other media have a major role in that, of course, as well. But we still talk about the Mona Lisa, whether we like it or not.
Well, I can recall in college taking a course called Art Appreciation. It was an elective. I needed a filler in there. And I think I learned a little bit of that, and appreciation of music, I think, was the other one.
Yeah.
Where I had to listen to a lot of classical music.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there is a place for art, and I enjoy art. I've grown up with it as a youngster in New York. My dad used to track us down to the Museum of Art, of Natural History, and just every Sunday was an afternoon deal. We had to do something along those lines. So I was submerged in it, so to speak.
Yeah.
But art today, as you say, it's changed. It's the digital environment has made it faster, instantaneous, self-satisfying immediately.
Well, that may be the difference between what is art and what is information.
Very good.
And I think in a way tying that into printmaking, I mean, the easiest way to explain printmaking to painting is printmaking was sort of the information source, since it was invented by the Chinese. But in the West, it's really coming through Germany and coming from the East. But really, it was the means of communicating and getting information out to the masses before you had the digital age, right? So it was the first age of information, I'd say.
Okay.
That. So I think the reason I like these two media is one is much more immediate and it's much more in ways that you can explore color and meaning more directly. But I think printmaking I like because it allows you to share that information more generously, I think. So.
No, just to make sure that no one's confused listening, when we say printmaking in the vernacular of the art, we're not talking about printing a newspaper.
Well, I mean, that's printing. That's part of the printing
is that part
media.
of it? Okay.
But print, there's a distinction, and it's really one that's kind of rarefied for the average person. But the typical language is a printer is a commercial printer. It's someone who prints a newspaper.
Gotcha.
But you could have a printer who's also a printmaker, and a printmaker is typically someone who uses that media more for an art form and less for just the information it provides.
Well, like people who do pictures or words on T-shirts.
Yeah.
That's a print.
That's a printer, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
But you could be both.
Yeah.
There are a lot of artists that are both.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to make sure I spell it out, because for me, art is something I'm still learning about, and I imagine a lot of my viewers may be as well. They don't teach it in schools anymore that much. At the university level, yes, but at the public school level,
yeah,
I think it's kind of lost.
Yeah.
Along with music and sports. But the bottom line is the humanities are important. So
Yeah.
we need to talk about them.
Yeah, it's interesting. My daughter's at classical, and she's doing her junior project on art education and in the high schools and why it's been cut back so much. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting. She's taking that on too.
Very good. Good
So,
for her.
Yeah.
Listen, according to your website, you spent some time at the Gettysburg National Park.
Yes.
What was that experience about, and tell us about it.
Well, I always like to say that, people don't think artists, can provide or support for themselves, but there's ways that artists do that are unique to being in the arts, and that's all the arts. And one of them is residencies, artist residencies. And for some reason, that's an area in the country that's growing. And it's international as well. And basically, it's communities that want to bring arts in. AS 220 has one here in Providence.
Yes.
The Bird Sanctuary just started one down in the Norman Bird Sanctuary down in Middletown, Portsmouth. And they're places where they house artists. They provide them with space, sometimes with a stipend, travel money, sometimes expensive, depends on the residency, to bring them in to respond to the community that they provide. So the National Park Service has a separate nonprofit foundation called the National Park Foundation, and they provide artist residencies to any of the national parks. And I was particularly interested in Gettysburg, so I applied for one there, and I was awarded a stipend and a place to live for several weeks.
What did you do down there?
I worked on a project related to my print imagery tied to memorial art. One of the things they give you is full access to the museum there, their collection, and also the whole park. And I was housed in a building that's on one of the old hospitals from the battlefield. So there were two artists there when I was there. I was there and another gentleman from Israel, actually, a painter. And then part of that is you do a public service component. You usually do a presentation. I was interviewed by the local college podcast that they have related to it. And I just worked. And the main thing is for you to make work.
Very good.
And eventually to donate something to the park, Yeah, so it was really tied to my interest in memorial arts.
Well, which is a good segue into what is memorial imagery or memorial art?
Yeah. My background actually was in historic preservation, and I worked in that field for the first 8 years out of college, 9 years. And part of the reason I'm at Roger Williams is they have the oldest preservation program in the country. It's the oldest undergraduate. It's pretty prominent that way, pretty well known. And when I was hired, they liked the fact that I had this preservation background, and I studied the fine arts in my late 20s, early 30s, and went back into that and went into that field, so I could cross over in those disciplines. So one of the areas I was always been interested in since I worked in Massachusetts in preservation was gravestone imagery and studies. And the Association for Gravestone Studies was founded in the 70s, and it's in Massachusetts. So when I worked for the state of Massachusetts in preservation, I often sent people there for information on gravestones. But the imagery is just fascinating to me.
So are we talking just pictures of different cemeteries?
No, I'm talking about stones. How people designed their memorials.
Oh, okay.
And there's a real the Northeast, New England, has some really interesting 18th, 17th century stones that have had a lot of scholarship by some prominent people. But I was more interested in the kind of commonplace stones that came out of the 19th century, the kind of more working class mentality, the less stone, and that's where Gettysburg comes in too. During the kind of early democracy, if you want to call it, especially around the time of Lincoln, when he's really pushing a republic to be a democracy as well, it became more and more important that people recognize all their dead, not just the rich and powerful. And so one of the things that Lincoln and Grant after him did is they set up a gravestone program for all the military dead in the North.
Arlington.
So every single, in 1872, I think it was, they basically established that every single soldier got a stone. And that was different than before that, where it was only the general or maybe some prominent captain would get a stone and the rest of the people were put in mass graves. So Gettysburg was the first in that series, and that's a very democratic way of looking at gravestones. But it also meant that you had to figure out ways of providing them to people affordably. And a lot of times the imagery or the information is merely text, or maybe some sort of stock images coming from the print material at the time.
Okay.
So I became really interested in where that material was coming from. Like, where were people finding it? What kind of source material was being given to them? And it really goes back to earlier gravestones, but where does the death's head come in the 18th century? Where does an angel image come in? And how do these images disseminate through the print media? So that was my interest.
Now, back in the day, of course, I don't know what day that was,
Yeah.
but I imagine the people who made gravestones were these people with hammers and chisels, and they
Yeah.
would chisel this stuff out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they had images then as well,
Yeah.
but probably more simplistic, I gather.
No, some pretty sophisticated stuff came out of the 17th, 18th century.
So it was a real art form.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And of course, Rhode Island has some very famous stone carvers. The most famous that's still functioning as a shop is the John Stevens shop in Newport.
Oh, okay.
But there are a lot of other carvers that were coming out of the 17th and 18th century that were extracting stone in pretty low industry. It's pre-industrial stone extraction. So getting the stone out of the earth, cutting it, was a hard labor to do.
Okay.
And then in the 19th century, you get a lot of hydropower, and you get pneumatic drills, and you get a lot of industries that allow you to pull out stone easier.
Okay.
Too.
Sure.
So,
Now I see what you mean by industries.
yeah. Yeah, like, how do you get that stone somewhere? I mean, nowadays it's countertops, right?
Yes.
So,
Oh, big business.
yeah.
Big business.
So countertops, if you want a domestic countertop, it's actually more expensive and harder to get than to get Brazilian or Indian or non-West American stone.
Italian stone or whatever.
Yeah, Italian too. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken the tours of Newport, of the mansions, and listened to the spiel that they give you, and how many of those mansions out there were built with stone.
Absolutely.
And that was brought in
Yeah.
from these countries,
And-
because they were trying to make duplicates.
Well,
quite
that's
frankly.
right. But I think at that period, you might have had a lot of domestic stone, like Indiana limestone, which was really popular. The State House is Georgia marble, for instance.
Well, this is true, because they
Yeah.
also, too, I know, and I think it was the Kennedy home out there, is it Rosecliff? I think that's the one where they brought in
Hammersmith.
Italian artists who painted with feathers to put the grain
The wood
in
grain.
the granite that
Yeah.
didn't have it.
Yeah,
So they
yeah,
had to match it.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, yeah, and there were a lot of Italian masons, stone carvers that were shipped over to this country for that
Yeah.
kind of work.
Hence the Italian population in Rhode Island, probably.
Well, yeah, more in like Vermont and
Where there was granite was a lot
granite
more
and marble. Yeah,
available. Yeah. Yeah, I went to school in Vermont. I used to swim in a granite quarry.
in Dorset or.
Out in no, actually, I was in Putney.
Oh yeah.
But-
Okay. Yeah.
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 But anyway, so you've been doing this gravestones for studies for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Off and on. Yeah. For quite a long time.
Now I know that you had a studio at one time
Yeah.
at the intersection of Broad and Elmwood,
Yep. I
where the
did.
cemetery is.
Yeah. Grace Church Cemetery. Yeah.
Now tell me, did you see any interesting stones there?
Yeah. I mean, I really chose that cemetery. It was a kind of conscious decision.
Okay. Anything that connects that community with today?
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's still active burials in there.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. Mama Kelly, who is a local neighbor, she was buried there maybe 2 months ago.
Okay.
There are a lot of children. I got an email last week from a woman, I think it was a woman, who was from Illinois, and she was looking for, I think it was a she, was looking for a baby that was buried there. They found the death certificate. It was an Italian family, and I've met a couple Italian Americans who have family buried their children that were pre-christened, and they couldn't be buried in a Catholic cemetery, so the Episcopal Church allowed them to bury, and there's a children's plot there.
Huh.
So they're not marked.
I didn't realize there were still burials there, because it gets vandalized so much by by people.
Yeah, there's people who push over the stones, and yeah, but No, and there are a lot of nice people who kind of operate in there too that are, just trying to make a life.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's neglect more than vandalism, I think, as much as anything.
So that cemetery, is that privately owned?
It's owned by Grace Church,
Oh, okay.
which is on Westminster Street downtown.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, there's some great stones in it, but they are pretty modest. There are some prominent ones too. There's Senator Knight, Governor Knight. I think he was both the senator and a governor. There's the first bishop of the Episcopal Church of Rhode Island there, and he finished up Grace Church. He was rector there. There are a lot of pretty prominent people living, kind of the rich and famous of Rhode Island. The Knight Library, of course, is right around the corner. But then there are, a lot of people who had nowhere else to bury their dead, and that's what I found with these children.
Now, is the cemetery that's further up on
Elmwood?
On Elmwood, is that connected to this one?
No, it's funny because it's easy to confuse those two because they're so close. That's Locust Grove, and that was a private development cemetery. It was established as a cemetery for people to buy plots.
Okay.
And that was a pretty fancy neighborhood back then when that was put in.
Yeah, I can tell by the houses.
So Locust Grove is probably 1880s, but Grace Church is 1834.
Wow.
So it's pretty early.
We're hanging out with Roger Williams.
That's right. Well, yeah, right. But it was kind of retreat. It was like, we want to have a church cemetery, but let's have it in the retreat, go out in the country to visit our dead, which was.
Now, also on your website, there was reference to something called the Wedding Cake House. What is the Wedding Cake House?
Well, the Wedding Cake House is a kind of iconic house on Broadway near Toby and Broadway. And it is actually called the Kendrick Prentice Tarocki House. And it was a house that was built in the 1870s by a guy named Kendrick. That's right. And it passed into the hands of another wealthy industrialist by the last name of Prentice, and then eventually into two Italian seamstresses, Anna and Laura Tarocki, who had their dressmaking establishment in there, and they lived there. So they were around, they moved in, I think, around 1910, and they ran it until the 50s, 60s maybe, when one of them died. Mm-hmm. But they basically dressed the rich and famous of Providence for 40 years or something. And it was a beautiful house. So it went into disrepair when the family sold it to, I think, some people who were they were investing, they weren't buying it. And it sat vacant for a good 20 years, and the damage was pretty pronounced. And so a number of developers tried to save it. I think the Greater Elmwood came around trying to community works, and they failed due to some opposition from a neighbor. And eventually, a group called the Dirt Palace that are in Olneyville took it on. Xander Morrow and Pippi Zernoza are the two kind of key leaders of that, and decided to try to make it into another artist residency, so much like the one I talked earlier about. Mm-hmm. So they have rallied support from the city, from the state, from various grants, the Rauschenberg Foundation, Andy Warhol Foundation, to turn it into this kind of public event. And so they've commissioned 150 artists to do works in it, including plastering, tiling bathrooms with different artists, glass chandeliers and windows and mirrors. Carpenters, plumbers have been all involved. Everyone's been involved in it. And they've really remarkably saved this building. It's a beautiful building. It's called the Wedding Cake House because it's so fancy and prominent.
Is it on the historic preservation list?
It is. It is. It's part of the Broadway Historic District.
Well, yeah, there's a number of historic buildings on Broadway.
Yeah. So it is one of the contributing houses. And yeah, it's really almost, it's getting there. It's almost finished, I think.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the family, the ladies who ran their dressmaking business there, and then you had the Dexter family, which was the
training ground,
the Cranston Armory and the training ground.
Yeah.
That must have been a very booming area.
It was.
At that time.
It was. I think if you look at Broadway, it really ties to the mid to late industrial periods. I mean, you have nice houses that come before that, but you know, the Bell Street Chapel and the Eddy Estate were right across the street. You have the people who had the Providence Cold Storage downtown that was torn down a few years ago. You know, it was the place to live in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And
Now, you're a resident of the West End.
yeah, I don't live in a house like that.
Well, but
But
you have a house that you've been redoing.
I have.
And I know, because we've talked a bit about your studio that you're working on.
It's like the little dig, the little big dig. Take you forever.
Listen, they're always a big dig when you're doing them.
Yeah, so true.
So tell me about the studio. Is that going to be a public place or just a place for you to work?
It's mostly going to be a place for me to work. It was originally a car garage. It was a separate property that was adjacent to what my house is. My house is on the site. And at some point in the 1930s, I think, 40s maybe, it was merged into my house's property as a garage. But so it's kind of a neat little history that garages have. I learned this from having to deal with it. It was once a little 1.5 story, you know, pitched roof garage. And then cars got bigger, so they popped out the front and they popped out the back for bigger cars. But the pulleys were in it originally for pulling out. And then my husband used it as his print shop, but he grew out of that really quickly. And then I moved into it and started working on it about 2 years ago. And my friend Monica Kramer, who's an architect who works in town, she did the redesign of it. She did a beautiful job. And she recently finished the Almy Street School design, which she's the one who did the architecture for that. Also lives in the neighborhood.
Well, there's a lot of artists living in the West.
That's right. We got a lot of kind of poor but happy people.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there were some issues with contractors when aren't there, and I found a really wonderful one who's finished up most of the work. But there's still some plumbing. My plumber went bankrupt with my deposits, so I had to find a new one. And so there's been some delays, but I hope it's finished in the next week or two.
Very good. Excellent.
Once I have heat, I think I'll feel a lot better.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Always feel better with heat.
I really do, yeah. But yes, so yeah, I'm going to have some events. I mean, I always feel like a property like that, when you have something that isn't your home, can always offer some public commitment too.
Well, that's that other side I was talking about your passion to be part of the community to be engaged, and you do a lot of that. What are you doing at Southside Cultural Center?
Well, right now I'm on the board. I was originally on the steering committee when Richardson Odigan really brought to life this program. Originally, it's had a couple iterations. Right now, Karen Baxter is the chair of our committee, and she's doing a wonderful job of trying to rally people with that. But we're trying to keep that historic building, which was originally a Sunday school building. It's the original Trinity Theater was in there, alive. The church, it was just too much of a burden, so they separated off its functions so it could be a nonprofit that we are part of, to provide community support to the arts in the South Side. It has a number of tenants, the Latino arts,
Yes.
Laotian, a number of other ones, Rhode Island Black storytellers, improv. So they all have space in there, but the building itself needs a lot of care to get it to be, first of all, accessible.
I've been in the building, yeah.
Yeah, and also to provide really like a place for kids and for people to go to kind of enjoy events in the South Side. It's been a challenge.
What is that big plastic structure behind the church?
Okay, that was a collaboration project we did with Rhode Island School Design, an architecture program project. It was community outreach, and it's called Southlight. It's basically a venue for people to have events and for us to have events. Yeah.
No, see, I driving by, I thought it was like a hothouse, and they were growing plants.
That'd be nice too.
And veggies.
Yeah, no, they do have. We do have markets. You know, like we've had Saturday markets.
Yeah, but that building is strictly for.
It's for us to use as an organization, but also we've had like receptions and performances, a sort of protected outdoor space.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that was a collaboration with RISD, and we're really excited about it. I think, but the thing is, there's just so much the actual building needs that we've gotten a lot of support, it's just a matter of keeping the match and getting the support from the public
Yeah.
to keep it going.
So when someone rents that space, I imagine it's a rental. Is it reasonable?
It's very reasonable, and
Okay.
I think there's an assumption that it's going to be donated, but unfortunately, there's just too much infrastructure that we're
Sure.
trying. So we work with, we once had Wilbury Theater, had been our tenant for a while, but they needed more space and we needed more flexibility. So they moved eventually. But yeah, it's still a work in progress, very much a work in progress.
Very good. Well, one of the things I'm sure of that as long as you're involved, you'll be pushing, because
so.
I know you, and you are committed to doing that kind of work, and tying art and community activism together is important. And clearly, the wedding cake issue, the wedding cake house, the cemetery, the memorials, all of that is part of the community. I mean, they're not distinct from the community.
Yeah, yeah.
And as a community, people should be aware at least of what's there.
Oh,
Because
sure.
these are assets. Not that they're for financial gain, but they're assets to the community that could be used, for purposes of bringing new people in, bringing in new businesses, bringing in more artists in, such as at the wedding cake operation. So it's important, and you symbolize that.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Well, so I'll end with this. A woman who moved into one of the new swap buildings in Southside, right across the street from Grace Church Cemetery. It was her first permanent home in some time, and she said, "I look out over that cemetery and I feel like I'm looking over Central Park."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it's neat that she appreciates that as an open space, as something that gives her green space in the city. So,
This is true, because that's disappearing
yeah,
rapidly.
yeah.
I know you've talked about not having much lawn over in your
Oh,
neighborhood.
well, it's when they pave on Saturday mornings, which happened last week, but I won't get into that. There's a lot of illegal paving and stuff. Yeah, that's definitely an issue in Federal Hill. Yeah.
I think we were talking about the lack of squirrels because there was no trees or something.
Well, yeah, or there's no bunnies.
Oh, bunnies, that's what it was.
Yeah, I have a pet bunny, and it's like, all the bunnies that get lost, they come to my house. So, yeah,
So there's a sign out there.
yeah, right, come to me. Yeah.
Listen, we've run out of time, but I want to thank today's guest, Ann Tate, and you, the viewers, for tuning in to another segment of In Another Opinion. A special thanks to Rhode Island PBS for making this program possible. Give us your opinion on Facebook or Twitter at In Another Opinion. I'm your host, Peter Wells. What's your opinion?
Someone gave, someone donated, someone left a legacy. Generations of generous someones have helped shape Rhode Island into this amazing place we call home. How do you thank them? By leaving your own legacy. We can help.